Well, as winter finally, hopefully comes to an end in Saskatoon, thoughts turn to warmer weather, and where better to spend a hot summer night than on the rooftop here at the Yard and Flag. And that's where we are for this episode of Where You Live. Of course, it's not only a great place for food and drink, it also provides an outstanding view of Broadway Avenue, which is the subject of this show. Let's learn a little bit more about this historic area with City Archivist Jeff O'Brien.
Broadway actually predates Saskatoon because, of course, Broadway follows part of the route of the old Moose Woods to Batoche Trail, which goes up Broadway and then hangs right at the riverbank, goes up to the university grounds and up to Batoche. So Broadway is very, very old as we measure time in this part of the world. Now, at the same time, Broadway's always been a commercial street. So when Saskatoon was first founded in 1883, the first European settlers arrived here to build their houses and settle the temperance colony of Saskatoon in the summer of 1883. And when they surveyed that first area, it was the Nutana neighborhood, and Broadway was the heart of the neighborhood, and it was a commercial street. So the very first business there was established by Dr. J.H.C. Willoughby, who opened a general store out of a tent on Broadway in June of '83. Then a little later that summer, that August, they got a load of wood up from the south. They shipped a load of wood up the river, and they built the first wooden structures in Saskatoon, and the first of them was a store built at Broadway in Maine. The reason it's called Broadway is because it's so wide. Broadway is wide enough that you can turn a horse-drawn wagon right in the middle of it. In fact, Broadway is so wide that one day in 1888, a fella named Ted Mears got lost crossing Broadway. He was in a snowstorm. He was at a party on one side, and he needed to go back and check out his cows. And so he left the party in the middle of a blizzard, got lost while crossing Broadway, and ended up, they found him a few days later, 5 miles away, frozen to death in the snow. So just be careful crossing Broadway. When the railway came to Saskatoon in 1890, Saskatoon kind of moved across the river to the downtown, left Nutana a little high and dry, but Broadway was still the commercial center for the part of the colony that was south of the river because, of course, prior to 1907, there was no way to get across the river except for the ferry, which didn't really work that well. So everybody that lived in Nutana and the people who lived south of Nutana would shop there. Some of the really early businesses on Broadway, and some of these that, are very historic, well known in Saskatoon, Allwood's Harness Store, the Red Robin Diner, the Sun Cafe. You get up a little farther, you get things like the Hills Dairy and places like that are, that people, when they talk about Broadway, people have been on Broadway for a long time, will still have a memory of some of these places. Saskatoon's first hotel was on Broadway in 1888. The Garrison House on the corner of Broadway and 10th, where exactly where the bulk cheese warehouse is today, was listed as a hotel, and it was quite an imposing stone-built structure. It was later used as barracks by the RCMP, but for a little while anyway, it was a hotel in Saskatoon. When Saskatoon boomed in the years just before the First World War, of course, Broadway boomed too, and you see lots of legacies of that era still in place on Broadway. The Farnham block was one of those. Of course, it's gone now, but the building that Bud's is in, the Summerfelt block, was originally built to house the Royal Bank, and like a number of buildings on Broadway, had apartments above. And that was sort of one of the important elements of Broadway, is that it's not just a commercial street. It's not like 8th Street or 22nd Street. It is commercial and residential. There's bars on Broadway. This is the wonderful irony of Broadway, right in the heart of the old temperance colony, which was established because they didn't want any alcohol, right? So there's no alcohol in the colony. Well, right in the heart of the temperance colony, you can't walk down Broadway without hitting a bar nowadays. And there's been some very historic bars. I think Bud's is probably the oldest bar on Broadway. Broadway is very much a complete street. And all through its history, you've got businesses up and down Broadway, gas stations, and tons of gas stations on Broadway, but boutiques and camera stores and music stores and cafes and diners, and of course places like the Crypt, which used to be in the basement of the Farnham block, and the Louis Rial, and these were important music venues back in the exciting days of the 1960s. Joni Mitchell, got her start at first played to a public audience at the Louis Rial on Broadway. Broadway is the home of education in Saskatoon. Saskatoon's very first school was the Little Stone School, where Victoria School is now, opened in 1887. And you know, in those days, children who lived downtown had to come across the river to go to school on Broadway in Victoria School. And before they built the traffic bridge, children living across the river would cross back and forth on the railway bridge every day, because there was no other way to get across the river except for, you know, tiptoeing across a railway bridge back and forth, which is one reason why they finally built schools across the river.
And a big thank you, as always, to Jeff O'Brien, City of Saskatoon archivist, for giving us a bit of the history of Broadway. And now we're going to move into present-day Broadway. Happy to be joined by Deanne Mercier from the Broadway Business Improvement District. Deanne, you're relatively new to this position, started last August. For you, what drew you to this role? What made you want to work on Broadway and really represent this area of the city?
Well, Broadway is a great area. I live close by in Queen Elizabeth, so this is my stomping grounds and has been since I came here to go to university at the U of S. So I just love the diversity, the really walkable nature of the area, and that it's really well known in the community, so I don't have to do too much work. No, it's really well known in the community, and that when people travel, they say, oh, that street in Vancouver, oh, it's like our Broadway.
Sure.
Or when they travel, they say, oh, you know, it's kind of like Broadway. So Broadway is that touchstone for people of what an interesting neighborhood that you could just go and spend the day at is. And so that's really exciting for me.
And as we heard about in the beginning of the show, it is an area that's had its ups and downs, as many areas in any city will do, but it is really such an interesting blend of that historical side of things. You can see that history, it's still here, but it's also still feels very modern as well.
Yeah, so it has a great mix of 100-year-old buildings. So the bulk cheese was the prison, the RCMP detachment at one time, and to buildings that have just recently been renovated to look very modern within the past couple of years here. The 701 building, which has Una and Freshie and Ride. So we have new businesses coming and changing spaces that have always been here to fitting into little nooks and crannies, and it's really exciting.
And it's really quite a variety of businesses as well. I mean, I used to live a block off of Broadway. I grew up 3 blocks from Broadway. Really, pretty much anything you would ever need, unless you're maybe buying a car, you can get right here on Broadway.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a great bike shop here. We have the bulk cheese warehouse, which is, you should just come just to see it.
Yeah.
Even if you're lactose intolerant, you should still, you know, there's still stuff there for you. You know, to like hidden gems, like the Clay Studio 3, which has different pottery there. Or we have Handmade House, which has arts and crafts, as well as the Saskatchewan Craft Council, which you can see some of the best crafts Saskatchewan has to offer.
For sure. Now talk a little bit about your role in terms of the Broadway Business Improvement District. What is it that you folks do to help out all of this diversity of businesses we have here?
So yeah, we want to make sure that Broadway is flourishing and that it's welcoming to everybody who comes here. So that involves everything from keeping the place clean to making sure the flowers look beautiful, the trees are looking good, to making sure that people feel safe here, to make sure that there's interesting art, to make sure that the businesses' needs are met as well, so that their businesses can foster. And really what we do that is try to help liaison with the city so that they can do some of these really cool things that they're doing, such as have an outdoor roof patio or have sidewalk cafes and those things that really bring a lot of life to the district.
Absolutely. Let's talk about, in terms of vacancy, it doesn't seem like there's really all that much vacancy ever. When something opens up, it usually gets snapped up pretty quickly. At least that's my impression.
Yeah, so I think this is a very desirable neighborhood, and it's a great place for, like you said, a variety of businesses to be here. It has a lot of foot traffic and a lot of what my mom would say, looky-loos. So it's a great place for people to come and see what you're offering. But you know, there definitely has been some changes with Lydia's, with the Farnham block coming down. And we're really excited to see what goes up there next and what kind of business that brings to the area.
And I was going to ask about that. Do we know anything about, because that was certainly such an iconic building, you know, located right across the street from Victoria School. spent many hours in Lydia's during my university years, certainly. Talk about maybe what the future holds for that area, and if there's any other big developments coming to Broadway that folks should know about.
Well, I've seen some plans for the new Farnham block. And it looks spectacular. I think the hope is for a second floor restaurant that has some great outdoor vistas so people can see. So that's hopefully coming down the pike in the next couple of years here. And I get emails and phone calls all the time from people being like, I'm interested in bringing my business to Broadway. What kind of spaces are available? What do you have? So there's always things that might be popping up.
Absolutely. Now, I know you're not the city planner or in charge of things like that, but are there restrictions? Are there the types of things that you don't want to have on Broadway? Are there any sort of limitations that you put in on businesses, or is it kind of, we'll make just about anything work?
Yeah, I think it's really up to, the property owners. Sure. They have a very strong community association in the area, Nutana Community Association, and they really want to see things that bring life and vibrancy to the district and make it safe for everybody as well. We do have 2 schools right on Broadway, as well as Nutana Collegiate, which is just off Broadway. So again, we want to make sure that, it's a safe place for families, kids as well.
Absolutely. Well, you talk about the life and vibrancy we see on Broadway. That really it shines all year long, but in the summertime is really when I feel Broadway comes alive. Not just here on rooftops like at the Yard and Flagon, but in terms of the festivals, that sort of thing. Talk about just the schedule that you have during the summer, because I know it kind of goes really once that sun comes up and the leaves come out. It's pretty. It's a lot of fun here on Broadway.
Yeah. So they've recently been implementing more block parties here. So they do a thing called Fit Fest that Broadway YXE spearheads, where it's a outdoor boot camp, spin class, yoga, everything you could need outdoors with some great music pumping. So that's really exciting. Reggae and World Music Festival happens behind Victoria School as well. Probably the biggest festival that Broadway is known for is the Potash Corp Fringe Festival, which happens every year in the district. It's happening this year, August 2nd to 12th. And one thing that Broadway really spearheads is the Broadway Street Fair, which is going into its 34th year, September 9th. So that kind of is what we all ramp up towards, and then those are some of the best sales, best deals you could possibly have is during the Broadway Street Fair. So I really encourage people to come check it out.
That's fantastic, Deanne. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us today, helping set up this show. We do a great job representing the businesses here on Broadway, and coming up on Where You Live, we're going to be talking to a couple of those business owners, so stay tuned. So located right across the street from the Yard and Flagon, where we are for today's episode of Where You Live, is of course the iconic Broadway Theatre. Happy to be joined by Kirby Warchenko from the Broadway Theatre. Kirby, your history though goes back even before your association with the Broadway Theatre.
True.
You've been here for almost 3 decades working on Broadway?
Yes, at some point my bones will be paving stones underneath the street here. 1991 was the year that Brainsport opened for the first time in one of its very early locations. Mm-hmm. And I was the first employee there in 91 and kind of kicked around back and forth a few years and ended up managing when it was on the corner here where Gibson Swoda used to be.
Sure.
I ran Brainsport and Pedestrian for a few years there. And then I started the Broadway Theatre in 2008.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. For you, what is it about this area? What keeps you coming back to Broadway? I mean, I know why I love it. Why do you love Broadway? In a sentence or two, I think the easy thing is just that it's like a small city in that, you have this strip of very busy stores and retailers and shops of all kinds of services and that kind of thing. You also have 5,000 residents very nearby. Yep. You also have 3 schools, and so it starts to feel less like a block or two of shops and more like a small city, and there's a very strong community feel here. Of course, like I said, in early 90s when I started, this street was not what it looks like now. Sure. There was 5 vacancies on this block. The spot next to us was actually Salvation Army. It was not a nice block and not a nice neighborhood in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so people really, as happens in this cycle of boom and bust, whether it's a neighborhood or a city or whatever,
people band together and they take care of each other, and people on this street, they care about their businesses because it's all independent owned for the most part. I mean, out of 160 plus businesses, I think there's less than 10 that would be national or international chains. So it just tells you a lot of people are invested here, and that means that they care, and it means they put a lot of time and work into it.
And when we talk about that boom and bust, that cyclical nature, there might be no better symbol of that than the Broadway Theatre where you currently work. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode just on the history of that building, but
Please no. But yeah, we could, yeah.
it would be a lot of work on your part, so we won't do that. Just briefly, just a quick sketch of what this building has gone through since it began in the early 1900s.
I think I can do it in a couple minutes or less. 1946, it gets groundbreaking and opens as really one of the only architecture of that type of a Art Deco architecture in Saskatchewan, and opens to big fanfare. People are coming for nickel movies. Back then, we were getting 5,300 people a week for films in that one little space. Fast forward a long time into the mid-70s, about 76 or 7. By that time, it's changed hands a number of times. It becomes an adult theater for about 6 years. In 1983, 2 locals named Chris Jones and Guy Edlund took over the running of that theater, and they were the ones that really changed it. They were the ones that changed everyone's mind in Saskatoon for what it could be. They started showing art house cinema. They were the first ones to book live shows and events there, and they had a great 10-year run there where it got to become the Broadway that I grew up. I mean, I grew up going there. In '83, right after they took it over. That was the first time I'd ever set foot in there, and so then fast forward again. 10 years. In '93, it becomes a community-owned nonprofit. And community-owned means an awful lot to us, and I think to the people who come and support the theater. A lot of people put tireless hours and volunteer hours for a long time into getting the building heritage status, nonprofit status, charitable status, doing a huge physical renovation, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
And so, and that actually happened in about 2003-04. And then in 2008, I started as the executive director. And so I'm just starting my 10th year, I think, right now. So it's, that's a small hit for 60 years, but gives you a sense of what it's been and what it's gone through. In my time there, I can give you a couple of numbers that I think are pretty telling. The year I started in '08, we were seeing 28,000 visitors a year through the Broadway. This year, we'll certainly break 80,000.
Wow.
And so for us, for one little room with 430 seats, we're turning that room all the time, and it's great because sometimes in 3 days we'll have 7 or 8 different events. We'll have multiple events in a day, and that to me really reflects it being community owned. People get to use it for what they want it for. If you want to come for your type of event and you like the film, but your kids come for live theater, but your wife comes for a comedy show, and someone else comes for church, and someone else comes for a wedding, it doesn't matter. It's all the Broadway, it's all yours, but we get to kind of be a little bit of everything for everybody.
Yeah, I remember coming back here in the early 80s. I was actually friends with Chris Jones's son.
Sure.
I remember coming here and seeing like Back to the Future there and stuff like that. Talk about what it's like running a small independent movie house in this day and age, because of course it is sort of the age of the multiplex and that sort of thing.
Sure.
You obviously provide something much different.
Sure, but you're drawing a good distinction. I mean, the fact is the Broadway was an art house movie theater almost exclusively to the time I started. What we've done is really try to flesh out its role as an arts and culture center. If we were trying to just be an art house movie theater, we'd be dead a long time ago. And to that end, we're still very committed to film. We still do all kinds of things to make enough money so that we can incur losses when we play film. And we believe that good film, art house film, independent from all around the world, etc., and Canadian film, obviously, we believe it's important to give people a chance to see it. However, the numbers they're not supporting, that is not a growing business model. And so what we've had to do is make sure that the other things that we do in our portfolio are strong and give us the footing so that we can keep doing that. Our 65 concert nights a year, we have 60 to 70 nights of theater, dance, and comedy per year. We do corporate rentals and school day things, and like I said, churches and weddings and funerals even. And that's good that we are a bit of everything to everyone. It's the only way we can do it. As you said, think about we're 14 blocks from a Cineplex with 14 screens and a VIP theater, and they're renting to churches, they're renting to schools, they're doing everything they can to try and figure out how to be their next version of a business. So yeah, it's a tough market if you were just in film, but we're trying to stay healthy by being a little bit of everything.
Absolutely, one of my favorite places in the world. I've got that framed Broadway Theatre poster hanging in my living room. Love the Broadway. And Kirby, thanks so much for joining us on Where You Live, sharing the Broadway Theatre story with us.
You're more than welcome.
And now happy to be joined by Brian McCashew from Brainsport here in Saskatoon. Certainly one of the landmark locations on Broadway, although you've had a few different locations. Talk a little bit about the history of Brainsport, Brian.
Well, I've been on 4 different locations on Broadway. We moved to our hopefully final location a couple years ago, so this October it'll be 3 years, and now we're just off Broadway on 10th Street.
Right. Talk about your association with this street. What is it that keeps you here? Because obviously you've had a few different changes in the business that have led to you moving. Why did you decide that no matter where you go, you wanted to be on this street?
Well, so I live 2 blocks away from Broadway. My kids go to Victoria School on Broadway. I have a business on Broadway. I think I'm pretty invested, but I love the fact that, you know, I can buy groceries, I can go for a beer, I can go for a coffee, I can walk to work. Like, it's a pretty ideal lifestyle for me.
And I think most people know about what it is your business is and why you exist, but talk about the idea behind Brainsport, why you wanted to bring this high level of service to particularly the running community in Saskatoon.
Well, I've been interested in running shoes since 1982, and when I was 21 I opened my shop, and I feel lucky. I'm sort of living my dream. So being able to fit running shoes on people, it's something that I think I'm reasonably good at after 3 decades. I still enjoy it, and the goal is that we fit our customers with the best pair of shoes they've ever worn. And that could be in the store, that could be when we have a free shoe day at one of the inner city schools, or even if we're sending shoes out across our city, across our province, or across the world, through our Gently Used shoe program.
And well, let's expand on that, because I know that community involvement is something that's very important to you, getting those shoes to people who don't have them wherever they happen to be. I know you've gone to Kenya more than once. Talk about that. Why is that something that's important to you, Brian?
Well, you know, I think there's like, just taking myself, I run marathons. When my shoes are worn out, there's still a lot of life left in them for someone who's you know maybe not running at a marathon level.
Sure.
And so those shoes can end up in the garbage, end up in the landfill, eventually in the landfill. So there's a tremendous need in our community, be it local or across the world, for people to have a good quality pair of shoes. And it's actually an easy thing for us to do. So our customers, when they come to buy a pair of shoes, they bring us their Gently Used shoes, and then we find a home. And we're at the point now where our supply and our demand are matching, right? So the shoes come in quickly, and then more importantly, they go out quickly.
And in terms of being a business owner on this street, now don't let the fact that Deanne Mercier from The Bid is just sitting over here, what is that like? What's the community like being one of these businesses? Is there a spirit of camaraderie between the businesses on Broadway?
Oh yeah, I think so. I feel like, you know, we're in a way a big family, right? You know, it's pretty cool. Say I'm with a rep from Toronto and we're walking down the street, and I can run into, like, if we're walking for lunch in a block, I can run into 13 people I know.
Sure.
Right? It's pretty cool. It's kind of like Sesame Street, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brian, thanks so much for joining us today on Where You Live. Wish you continued good luck here on Broadway with Brainsport.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about Broadway, and don't forget to spend some time here on Broadway this summer and throughout the year. I'm Simon Hyatt. Thanks for tuning in to Where You Live.